going to be talking about groundwater, the source of all drinking water here on Long Island. You may know that Long Island is actually a pretty unique area. It is the largest island in the continental U.S. Beneath all of Long Island are formations that store water. We call those formations aquifers. And these aquifers that are sandy contain all of the drinking water we use here on Long Island. While the water is stored in the aquifers, we call it groundwater. So where is the water? Well, it's actually in these sandy layers in between those very, very small spaces from one sand grain to another. If you dig down deep enough and expose the groundwater, you'll see that the water flows out of those spaces and you can literally see it. But mostly we don't see it that way, and so we have to rely on diagrams of where the aquifers are and how they work. So basically we have three primary aquifer formations. The topmost formation is called the glacial aquifer. The formation itself is only about 10,000 years old, and the water that it stores is only decades old. Right beneath the glacial aquifer is the main aquifer called the Magathy. That formation has been around since about 65 million years, but the water stored there is only about 800 years old at its oldest. And most of the water that we take out of the Magathy aquifer is less than 100 years or so. The deepest formation, the one at the very bottom of this sequence, is called the Lloyd. It is the oldest formation of all. It's over 70 million years old. But the water that it stores is thousands of years old. So down under Long Beach Island, for example, at the bottom of the Lloyd Aquifer along the South Shore, the water down there is as old as 8,000 years. All of the water that's stored in our aquifers that is fresh water begins as rainfall. And it has to first enter the glacial aquifer, and then some of that water passes down into the Magathy, and a small amount actually is able to reach the Lloyd and replenish it. So the glacial aquifer stores about 62% of all the groundwater that enters the system. The Magathy receives about 38% of all the water coming into the system, and the Lloyd only gets 3%. Back in the geologic past, Long Island was covered by ice, and this dates back to about 10,000 years ago. And when the ice melted off, it left a large debris field in a long line that stretches from the west to the east end of Long Island, and it created a formation we call moraines. These moraines create the high points in the land elevation of Long Island and create a dividing line, an imaginary dividing line we call the Groundwater Divide. And between the south side of this line, we create a South Shore water circulation system in the aquifer, and to the north is a northern circulation system. And we can see this on either side of the groundwater divide in this diagram. We get about 44 inches of rain each year, and half of that enters the groundwater system as recharge and replaces the water that we take out. The rain that falls right along that central line, that groundwater dividing line, is the only water that really has an opportunity to reach the Lloyd aquifer. All of the rest of the recharge remains in the other two formations. If you want to understand how an aquifer works, we can think of it as a giant bank. And just like in a bank account, you have money coming in, you have money going out, you might have some money in savings. The aquifer works exactly the same way, except we're working with water. So the water coming in is precipitation, and the water going out of the system on a constant basis includes the water we pump out for our drinking water, the water that discharges into the coastal waters, water that flows through streams, water that evaporates from the soil. All of those ways of losing water are always going on, and the water that stays behind is the water in storage that we drink as our groundwater. The key point in understanding this is that the system needs to be in balance. So the water coming in has to match the water going out. If the system becomes out of balance, then the whole groundwater regime changes in response to that, and the changes are usually changes that are detrimental, and we don't like to see those changes. So we humans are having a real impact on the groundwater itself. And we see this in two ways. One is in parts of Long Island, we are pumping too much water out of the aquifers. And this is creating saltwater intrusion on both the north and south shore of Nassau, as well as the north and the south forks of Suffolk County. Also, we are polluting our groundwater, and we see this in water quality issues. And there are four main groups of chemicals that are causing most of our problems. First category of chemical is volatile organic compounds, VOCs. These are the chemicals that we talk about when we talk about toxic chemicals. Many of them are carcinogenic. Secondly, the second group of chemicals of concern are nitrate chemicals. These come from sewage, they come from fertilizers and other types of chemical sources. And this is a problem more extreme in Suffolk than in Nassau because Suffolk is still heavily reliant on septic systems which release their human waste back into the groundwater. Third chemicals that are creating problems are many different types of chemical spills from industry, gasoline spills, MTBE, which is a component of gasoline, and other similar products. These create highly concentrated areas of pollution that require remediation of some type. And the last big category comes from manufacturing and commercial activities that are legacy pollutants. These are activities that happened in the past, have created very, very serious areas of contamination, and we identify these through the Superfund program. Long Island has the largest number of Superfund sites in all of New York State, over 250. These water quality problems are all a consequence of the fact that we live on the land above our groundwater supply. If we look at what goes on below ground, we see that whether it's a spill or whether it's discharges from septic systems, they behave in a similar way as this pollution gets into the groundwater. You can see the slide on the left is showing pollution streams from a septic system. And what happens is once this pollution passes down through the soil into the groundwater, it is slowly moving through our sandy aquifers. It trails out in these long streams of what we call plumes, and they can travel for long distances, may eventually hit a well, may pass on into coastal waters. Similar responses occur for chemical spills. The material travels through the soil, and then once it gets into the ground, groundwater is dissolved and flows away from the site in the form of a plume. These pollution plumes can be very, very expensive to clean up and take decades. So that's part of our problem with groundwater. But the other aspect that we rarely consider is how are we using our water? Right now, Long Islanders use about 150 billion gallons of groundwater each year, and that number goes up in a dry year. And we also use water differently between summer and winter use. So in the winter use, our water use is reasonably conservative, but when it comes to the summer, our water use can increase anywhere from 200 to 400%. You can see this diagram here that compares water use over the course of a year, and you can see these very dramatic spikes that represent our summer water use. And one point that is really important for people to understand, when you water your lawns in the summer, especially if you're using automated irrigation systems, this overuse of water in the summer does not mean that extra water goes back into the aquifer. None of that water recharges the aquifer and takes its place again in the groundwater system. It is lost from the system forever. And so when we look at summer water use in particular, we're doing harm to the aquifer in two ways. First of all, there's very little recharge in the summer because the plants capture most of the rainfall that occurs over the growing season. And secondly, we have this very dramatic increase in pumping that is taking water from the aquifer as well. So in the summer, we are creating very major stresses that causes the groundwater system to change. And as for how we use the water personally, People here on Long Island use a greater amount of water on a personal level than the national average. So on average, people around the country are using 100 gallons of water per person per day or less. Here on Long Island, we use as much as 140 gallons per person per day, and some people use far more than that. This is all water that we track through our public water supply systems, but this does not include water that's used for industry or water that's used for irrigation activities. So we're putting a major stress on our groundwater system just by the way and quantity of water that we use. The consequences of this water use practice is that we are harming areas of the aquifer system. We can see this in Nassau County, these areas in green up on the North Shore. We have the Great Neck area, the Port Washington area, the Sands Point area. These areas are all experiencing saltwater intrusion, invading all three aquifer formations. We're seeing a similar pattern down on the South Shore, under Long Beach Island and along the southwestern corner of Nassau County. So we have ongoing saltwater intrusion in both areas, and predictions are that saltwater intrusion is going to progress across the entire south shore of Nassau County and into the areas of the northern shorelines of Nassau County as well. A similar process is going on out on the Forks in Suffolk. So that brings us to the ultimate question: how can we protect our groundwater, and what should we be doing? Who is responsible for the groundwater of Long Island? How should we manage it? How do other places address this question of water management, and how do they solve it? The good news is that many communities in New York and around the United States have actually come up with an answer to this question. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're recommending that here on Long Island, we use the same solution that most other places have already gotten to, which is to dedicate a specific agency or entity that has only one purpose, that of managing our aquifers, and we call it an Aquifer Management Compact. An agreement here in the local communities to set up an entity that does the work that needs to be done. Well, what would it do? First and foremost, it would be our groundwater champion, and it would address the kinds of issues that all other management entities do. How much water can we safely take out of the groundwater system? How do we share it fairly among all those who want to use it? How do we monitor the withdrawals? How do we develop plans to implement both protection strategies for pollution and for quantity problems? And something we clearly don't do enough of for our groundwater system is conduct many, many more scientific studies to better understand how we are changing and damaging our groundwater supply. A compact would develop tools such as computer modeling tools and use that to understand options we have for better management. It would help us clean up these many, many contaminated sites so that they don't linger and continue to affect our drinking water wells. It would combat saltwater intrusion, and it would help promote conservation of our groundwater. The most important thing it would do is it would make groundwater protection our #1 priority. Many people say that the solution is better public education, and so the compact would help create educational materials that the public would get and become more knowledgeable and sympathetic to the actions that we need to take to better protect our water. It would report annually to the public. It would alert the public when risky situations developed, and especially it would represent our water interest on Long Island within the Long Island region. Essentially, it would become the science-based manager developing policies and practices to protect our groundwater. So the bottom line is this: we only have one source of drinking water, our groundwater. We ruin it or waste it at our own peril. Thank you.